Have you ever wondered how ordinary people who seem just like you and me, end up committing acts of cruelty that seem unthinkable? Or how entire societies spiral into division, hatred, and even violence? These aren't just philosophical questions. They're deeply human ones. And history has shown us time and time again that under the right, or rather, the wrong, conditions, even the most average person can get swept up in movements that destroy lives. What's even more chilling is this: these transformations don't happen overnight. And they aren't just relics of the past. The same psychological and social forces that led to some of history's darkest moments are still active today. They're shaping how we see others, how we talk to each other, and how we justify our actions, often without even realizing it. Let's take a look at one of the most horrifying examples in modern history: the Rwandan genocide. In just 100 days in 1994, nearly 800,000 people were murdered. But this wasn't done by some foreign invader or authoritarian government. These killings were carried out by ordinary citizens, neighbors, co-workers, even friends, who turned on each other. So, how does something like that even happen? How does a population descend into that level of violence so quickly? The answer is complicated, but one key factor is propaganda. In Rwanda, years of targeted messaging worked to dehumanize the Tutsi minority, portraying them as vermin, cockroaches, and enemies of the state. When you strip people of their humanity, it becomes psychologically easier to justify harming them. The people who carried out these atrocities didn't wake up one day and decide to become murderers. Their minds had been shaped, conditioned, over years to see others not as human beings, but as threats. This isn't just about Rwanda. It's about how all humans function. And if you think it couldn't happen where you live, or to people like you, that assumption is precisely what makes it so dangerous. Psychological studies back this up. Maybe you've heard of the Stanford prison experiment from the 1970s. In it, ordinary college students were randomly assigned roles of guards and prisoners in a simulated prison setting. The results were disturbing. Within just a few days, many of the guards began to treat the prisoners with cruelty and abuse. No one told them to act this way. There was no real authority forcing them. But once they stepped into a role, and believed in it, they started to act in ways that were completely out of character. What this experiment showed us is that cruelty doesn't require evil people. It just requires the right roles, the right environment, and the absence of accountability. The scary part: this means that every one of us has the potential to act in harmful ways under certain conditions. Now, fast forward to today. The world we live in is no less vulnerable. In fact, with the rise of social media and digital echo chambers, we may be more susceptible than ever to these same psychological traps. Just think about how political discourse has evolved online. People aren't just disagreeing anymore, they're demonizing each other. Political opponents aren't seen as people with different ideas, they're painted as existential threats. The other side becomes dangerous. And when someone's labeled as an enemy, empathy starts to fade. It becomes easier to harass, shame, dox, or cancel them, because now, it feels justified. You're not hurting a fellow human being, you're fighting back against a threat. This is how the cycle of dehumanization begins. And it usually starts with something subtle: a shift in language, a change in how we perceive others. It happens when we casually label entire groups as problematic, dangerous, or inferior. Over time, those small shifts can lay the groundwork for much bigger acts of division, and sometimes violence. So, what can we do about it? Well, the first step is self-awareness. We have to be able to recognize when we're being manipulated into an us versus them mentality. Every time we catch ourselves lumping people into broad, dehumanizing categories, we should stop and ask, who benefits from this division? Who profits from this outrage? Who is feeding this narrative, and why? By asking those questions, we start to take control back over our own minds. Another powerful way to resist these forces is to consciously humanize people. That means seeing individuals, not just groups or labels. No political ideology, religion, or nationality is made up of clones. Everyone has their own stories, values, and experiences. When we engage with people on a human level, it disrupts those mental shortcuts that lead to prejudice and hate. Propaganda is incredibly effective because it simplifies the world into good guys and bad guys. It makes us feel righteous, even when we're wrong. So, we have to be vigilant, especially with the kind of language we accept and use. Whenever we hear phrases that frame people as less than human, as parasites, threats, or enemies, that's a red flag. Historically, that kind of rhetoric has always come before atrocities. Always. But let's talk about something else that plays a huge role here: cognitive dissonance. This is the mental discomfort we feel when our actions don't line up with our values. And instead of changing our behavior, most of us change our story. We rationalize. Think about it. If someone sees themselves as a good, honest person but they lie to get out of trouble, what do? They don't usually admit the lie. They convince themselves that it was harmless, or necessary. I had no choice. It wasn't that bad. Anyone would have done the same. Over time, those justifications add up. And when people keep telling themselves they're still good, even while doing bad things, their moral compass starts to erode. This is how corruption becomes normalized. This is how war criminals, corrupt leaders, and everyday people all convince themselves they're still doing the right thing. And the most dangerous justification of all: believing that you're harming others for a greater good. Some of the worst acts in human history were committed not by people who thought they were evil, but by people who believed they were on the side of justice. Religious wars, political purges, censorship, violence, all done in the name of protecting the cause. And once someone is convinced their ideology is morally superior, they stop questioning their actions. At that point, they're capable of almost anything. Once the cycle of self-justification begins, it rarely stops. People double down. They dig deeper into their beliefs, and it becomes easier to justify worse and worse behavior. That's how history's darkest chapters were written, by people who truly believed they were doing what was right. And then comes the final stage, the one we have to be most cautious about: full-on dehumanization. When someone no longer sees a person, or an entire group, as human, any action can be justified. The human brain has this survival trick: it can suppress empathy when it sees others as less than. And that's what makes atrocities possible. This isn't ancient history. It's a repeating pattern. Let's pick up right where we left off. Throughout history, when we look closely at atrocities, genocides, mass violence, slavery, there's a consistent pattern. It always begins with language. Before the Rwandan genocide, radio broadcasts referred to the Tutsi people as cockroaches. Before the Holocaust, Nazis called Jewish people rats. During American slavery, black people weren't even legally considered human, they were classified as property. That's not a coincidence. That's the psychological groundwork for violence. When you remove someone's humanity, you silence the part of your brain that feels empathy. Suddenly, hurting them doesn't feel like hurting a person. It feels like squashing a bug. And this isn't just ancient history, it's happening right now. Listen to political speeches. Scroll through social media. Pay attention to how people talk about those they disagree with. The language is often charged, demeaning, and meant to strip away dignity. Words matter. Because before anyone picks up a weapon or passes an unjust law, Someone picks up a microphone, or a keyboard, and starts changing how we see each other. So how do we fight back? With radical self-awareness. Seriously, if you find yourself thinking, I would never do something like that, that's actually when you should be the most alert. Because the truth is, the most dangerous mindset isn't hatred. It's the belief that you're immune to it. The idea that, those people, did bad things, but you never could. That's the crack in the door where denial gets in. And denial is how history repeats itself. So what can you do? How do you keep yourself grounded in a world that constantly tries to pull you into tribalism, anger, and fear? Start by asking yourself honest questions. Regularly. Am I making excuses for behavior I would criticize in someone else? Am I treating people as individuals or as representatives of a group I dislike? Am I supporting something just because it aligns with my side, even if it feels morally wrong? These questions aren't comfortable, but they're necessary. Because morality isn't something you declare. It's something you practice, especially when it's hard. And let's be real. We all fall into self-justification sometimes. It's part of being human. We want to feel like we're good people. But when we make mistakes, that desire to feel good can keep us from facing the truth. So instead of correcting course, we spin the story. It wasn't really my fault. They had it coming. That's just how the world works. That's how moral decay sets in, not all at once, but little by little. Not with a monstrous act, but with a small compromise that we excuse. And once that door is open, it gets easier and easier to keep walking through it. Think of it like this. Every time you excuse something unethical, you're moving the boundary of what you find acceptable. And pretty soon, you're standing in a place you never imagined you'd be, wondering how you got there. Now, let's talk about one of the biggest red flags in all of this, moral licensing. This is when someone believes that because they're a good person, they're allowed to do bad things. It sounds absurd, but it happens all the time. A person donates to charity and then feels justified being rude to a stranger. A politician fights for one noble cause and then ignores another injustice. A company supports one social issue to distract from the harm they're doing elsewhere. The danger here is that the label, good, becomes a shield. It stops people from examining their behavior. I'm one of the good guys, therefore, everything I do must be okay. That's a trap. Because being good isn't a status you earn. It's a choice you have to keep making, over and over. Let me share something important. No one is born with an immunity to cruelty. But that's not bad news. That's actually empowering. Because if cruelty is learned, then so is compassion. If division is taught, then unity can be practiced. If propaganda works through repetition and conditioning, then truth and empathy can work the same way, if we're intentional. So what do we do with all this knowledge? We have to make it personal. This can't just be something we understand intellectually. It has to become part of how we live, how we see the world and how we treat others. One of the most powerful tools we have is education. And I'm not just talking about schools or textbooks. I'm talking about exposing ourselves to different perspectives. Learning about other cultures, belief systems, and ways of thinking. The more we understand the people we're told to fear or hate, the harder it becomes to dehumanize them. And dialogue, honest, respectful conversation, is key. Research in social psychology shows that when people have real interactions with those who are different from them, prejudice drops. Empathy goes up. Rigid thinking softens. People start to see the human behind the label. That's why open conversations, whether it's around the dinner table, in classrooms, or online, are so essential. They break the spell of tribal thinking. They remind us that most people, deep down, are just trying to live meaningful lives, just like we are. And history gives us more than just warnings. It gives us heroes, people who stood against the tide. Think about the families who hid Jews during the Holocaust. Think about the whistleblowers who exposed corruption at great personal risk. Think about activists who stood up to regimes, companies, or social norms, even when it cost them dearly. These people didn't have superpowers. They weren't saints. They were ordinary people who made extraordinary choices. And their courage reminds us that resistance is always possible, even when it feels like the whole world is headed in the wrong direction. But let's be clear, resisting doesn't always mean grand gestures. It starts with small, personal decisions. It means speaking up when someone uses dehumanizing language, even if it's uncomfortable. It means refusing to share propaganda, even when it aligns with our views. It means apologizing when we realize we've been unfair, rather than doubling down. It means checking ourselves before we justify actions that don't sit right with our values. These may seem like small things, but they add up, and they create a ripple effect. So, the question is, what kind of ripple are you creating? Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't just need people who call themselves good. It needs people who are willing to do good, even when it's hard, even when it costs them something. And that brings us full circle. The forces that lead to cruelty and division are not ancient relics. They're not locked in history books. They're active, alive, and thriving wherever people stop questioning their actions, wherever we allow ideology, fear, so where or does all of this leave our empathy? It leaves us with a choice. Ask yourself, very real, what will I do differently now that I understand because this? Every single day, we're shaping the kind of society we live in, through our words, our actions, and even our silence. It's easy to point fingers at history, to look at past atrocities and think, that would never happen now, or, I'd never be part of something like that. But the truth is, most people in those moments of history thought the same thing. The difference between those who resisted and those who went along wasn't their intelligence or education. It wasn't their religion or politics. It was their willingness to stay conscious. To stay awake when everyone else was asleep. To ask questions when it was easier to just follow the crowd. And that's something we can do too. Let's talk for a second about something we often underestimate, the power of small choices. Big moments in history, the ones we look back on with horror or pride, are made up of countless tiny decisions. A soldier choosing not to shoot. A neighbor choosing to hide someone. A teenager deciding to question what they've been taught. A parent teaching their child empathy instead of fear. These aren't grand, cinematic moments. They're quiet, sometimes invisible. But they matter. They matter immensely. And that's true today, too. You might not be in a position of power. You might not have a huge platform or influence. But you do have choices. You decide how you speak to others. What you share online. What you stand for when no one's watching. What jokes you laugh at. What conversations you walk away from, or step into. The idea that one person can't make a difference. It's a lie. Every act of courage starts with one person refusing to stay silent. And let's not forget, this fight we're talking about, the one against dehumanization, division, cruelty, it's not just about not doing harm. It's about actively preventing it. That's a mindset shift. It's not enough to just say, well, I'm not part of the problem. Because passivity is still a choice. Silence still has consequences. And history has shown us that the worst atrocities didn't just happen because of the people who lit the match, but because of the many who stood by and did nothing. So, let's flip that script. What if we became the generation that broke the cycle? What if we became the ones who didn't wait for catastrophe to start caring? What if we treated empathy not as a weakness, but as a skill, something we practice every single day? That's where change begins. And look, this isn't about guilt. It's not about walking around constantly afraid of making mistakes. It's about awareness. About developing a kind of moral radar. And just like any skill, it sharpens with use. Start small. The next time you feel yourself getting angry online, pause. Ask, is this person really my enemy, or just someone with a different perspective? The next time you hear someone dehumanize a group of people, even subtly, don't let it slide. Say something. You don't need to start a fight. Just plant a seed of doubt in that narrative. The next time you're tempted to share a post that demonizes the other side, stop and ask, is this helping anyone understand anything? Or is it just feeding the outrage machine? And most importantly, listen. Really listen. To people you disagree with. To people who challenge your worldview. You don't have to agree with them. But hearing them out. That's how empathy grows. That's how understanding begins. Here's the bigger picture. We all want to belong. That's the root of so much division, this deep human need to be part of a tribe. But the moment our tribe becomes more important than our humanity, we lose something vital. So, build your tribe around values that lift others up. Not just ones that validate your identity. Create spaces, online, in your friend groups, at your workplace, where people can disagree and still be seen as human. Where curiosity is stronger than outrage. Where compassion isn't seen as weakness but as strength. If we can do that, even in small pockets, it spreads. That's how culture changes. That's how movements begin. Let me leave you with this. You don't have to be a hero to make a difference. You just have to stay awake. To stay aware of your own biases. To keep your empathy alive, even when the world tells you to turn it off. To keep questioning the narratives you're being fed, especially the ones that make you feel morally superior. Because the moment you think you're above it all, that you'd never fall into the same traps as others, that's when you're most vulnerable. Not because you're a bad person. But because that's how the psychology of self-justification works. It creeps in through pride. Through certainty. Through the refusal to look in the mirror. So look, every day, and ask, am I acting in a way that honors the humanity in others? Or am I slipping into patterns that history has already warned us about? This isn't just a mental exercise. It's a call to action. We don't need perfect people. We need honest ones. People willing to own their flaws, face hard truths, and keep trying anyway. Because the real battle isn't between left and right, or this country and that one. The real battle is between awareness and apathy. Between empathy and fear. Between waking up and falling asleep at the wheel of history. So, what will you choose? If this message spoke to you, don't just scroll away. Take a moment to reflect. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to keep exploring ideas that challenge, inspire, and deepen your understanding of the world, subscribe to the channel. We've got so much more to uncover. Thanks for watching, and remember, the future is shaped by those who choose to stay human.